Hello YouTube, thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to talk about Logan and its place in the X-Men timeline. So, if you're like me, you've been a fan of X-Men for the past 17 years. And if you're not, no biggie. Either way, you might look at Logan and wonder where it fits in the X-Men timeline. After watching it, it's kind of murky because you're not really sure if it falls after the events of Days of Future Past or if it completely ignores the events of Days of Future Past. In the film, there's a point when Charles says, they're waiting for you at the Statue of Liberty. And Logan replies with, that was a long time ago, Charles. Now, we could use this as evidence that it's ignoring the Days of Future Past timeline. But if that's the case, then wouldn't we see a future that was more akin to the future that we saw at the beginning of X-Men Days of Future Past? But we don't see that. Instead, we see kind of a dystopian wasteland. A dystopia all the same, but different from the one that we saw before. Now, another way of looking at it is we could say that this is after Days of Future Past, but the events that we've seen in the previous films still occurred to some degree. I like to look at this film as though neither of these are the case. In fact, I'd like to look at this film in the way that I started looking at it once I'd heard an interview with Hugh Jackman where he had said that this film takes place in an altogether separate timeline. At the time, fans were scratching their heads, meaning, well, what does this mean for the X-Men? What does this mean for this or that? And later on, James Mangold, the director, would come out to say that this wasn't the case, that it is part of the timeline, it's just a different way of looking at things. But I'd like to think that James Mangold is the one who's leading us astray here, and not Hugh Jackman. I'd like to think that maybe Fox was just not really wanting to commit to the idea that this is a separate entity altogether. Now, the reason I say that it could be a separate entity altogether is if we look at Deadpool and use something, well, Deadpool as a fourth wall breaking character, when he says, which Professor X, Stewart or McAvoy, these timelines are confusing. We can look at that as a throwaway line in one Fox film and say, well, you know, it's Deadpool. That's what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to acknowledge that he's a comic book character and that other comic book characters are just comic book characters and that this is a movie and it's not real. But then in Logan, we have a scene where Logan makes fun of Laura. He pulls out her comic books and he's like, we've got a X-Men fan here. And he kind of thumbs through them and says maybe a third of it happened, but not like this. Now, this is another case of a Fox movie referencing the comic books and the stories of the X-Men outside of the movies. Now, what I'm the way I like to think of it is, what if the movies that we have seen are just an adaptation of these comic books shown in Logan? What if the reason it's a separate timeline and a separate universe altogether is that from these characters' point of view, like Deadpool, the previous films hadn't actually happened at all and in no way affect these characters? What if, in actuality, that these adaptations are just legends themselves? That the events that we've seen in X1 through 3 and the previous Wolverine movies, what if they were all just, like these comic books, an exaggeration of things we've seen before? And right now, this is the first time we're actually getting to see the real Logan and the real Professor X. We have this idea of what they're like and how they should be, but we don't know them. And it's not until we get this self-contained movie that doesn't really reference anything outside of itself that we finally get to meet and spend time with these characters in their natural setting. Anyways, what are your thoughts on this? Maybe you think that my idea is garbage. Or maybe you think it's great. Or maybe you have ideas that support this. Either way, let me know in the comments below. Hi guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe. Here's my last video. There's another video you might be interested in. Give me a thumbs up if you liked this video, and if you didn't, tell me why down below. I'd be more than happy to figure out ways to improve my channel. Have a great day.